I should have skipped the wedding entirely. I was only there because my cousin Bianca begged me to fill in for her maid of honor's last-minute food poisoning fiasco. I didn't even have a dress. I borrowed that lavender thing from someone I barely knew, a flowing floor-length gown that looked more bridal than bridesmaid. That was mistake number one. Mistake number two? The venue, not a church, not even a proper estate. A private villa in the hills outside Lake Como, heavily gated, surrounded by woods, and far too quiet for a celebration of this scale. The kind of place where fairy tales either begin or end in blood. Mistake number three, and this one should have made me run, was the security. Not ushers or catering staff with earpieces. Armed men in tuxedos, earpieces, and expressions like they'd already decided who they'd kill first. Bianca laughed it off, the family's old school. Mafia rumors, probably exaggerated. But even her voice had a tremble when she said it. I should have left when I saw the second black SUV pull up and no one got out. I should have left when the violinist stopped playing mid-note, and the lights flickered, and the bride's father pulled her aside for a whispered conversation. But I didn't. Because I wasn't supposed to be important. I wasn't even supposed to be in the photos. And besides, I thought, weddings like this have drama, don't they? It's Italy. People cry, fight, make speeches, get drunk, fall in love. I didn't expect people to disappear. The ceremony was opulent. Crystal chandeliers that reflected candlelight like shattered stars. Rows of dark wooden chairs filled with people who looked like they were either waiting for a wedding or a war. The bride wore custom couture. The groom was flanked by men with scars and smiles that didn't touch their eyes. And me? I sat in the front row, lavender gown rustling like a warning bell every time I shifted. When the vows were interrupted by a flicker of motion near the altar, most people thought it was a photographer. I knew better the second the masked men rushed in. There wasn't time to scream. One grabbed me by the arm. Another shoved a hood over my face. And just before it all went dark, I heard someone shout, "That's her, get the bride." The hood came off hours later. I was in a marble room lit by chandeliers, with men in suits lining the walls. My wrists were bruised. My heels gone. And standing at the center like a king carved from iron was Don Bonifacio Panicucci. He looked me up and down. Then he smiled like a man who'd just won a bet no one else knew he'd made. "Wrong bride," he said. "But this works better." Before continuing the story, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories to you. The moment the door shut behind him, I paced the room like a caged animal in couture. The suite was opulent, gold-trimmed mirrors, silk drapes, and a view of the lake I could almost believe was freedom. But every luxury screamed control. The wardrobe was already stocked with clothes in my size. The bathroom had monogrammed towels with initials that weren't mine. I opened drawers out of defiance, out of desperation, but found nothing useful, no phone, no laptop, not even a Bible. The windows didn't open, and the balcony was sealed behind reinforced glass. Everything about the room was designed to impress while keeping me inside. I wasn't in a prison. I was in a beautifully wrapped box, labeled and delivered to someone else's doorstep. And that someone had no intention of sending me back. A knock at the door didn't wait for permission before it opened. A woman stepped in, early 50s, dressed in black, her heels clicking like a metronome of disapproval. She carried a tray of food and set it down without making eye contact. "Eat," she said simply. "Don Bonifacio will see you when he's ready." I didn't move. "Where am I?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Why did he take me?" "I'm not who you think I am." The woman looked at me then, really looked. Her expression didn't soften. "You're exactly who he thinks you are. And you should eat before your blood sugar makes you stupid." I let her leave without another word, but the second she was gone, I locked the door behind her. It wouldn't hold if someone wanted in, but it gave me the illusion of control, and I was starving for illusions. I lifted the silver lid off the tray, porcini risotto, fresh bread, a small glass of red wine. The scent nearly undid me. I ate because survival demanded it, not because I accepted any of this. 2 hours later, the door unlocked with a quiet beep, and 2 men entered without warning. They didn't speak, didn't touch me, just nodded toward the hall like I was expected to know the drill. I considered resisting, just to see what would happen. But I wasn't ready to play that card, not without knowing the rules. So I followed them, barefoot, heart pounding with every step down the marble corridor. They led me to a study that looked like something out of a power fantasy: dark oak shelves, antique weapons on the walls, and Bonifacio Panicucci behind a desk large enough to land a helicopter. He didn't rise when I entered. He simply gestured to the chair across from him, like we were about to negotiate the price of land. "Sit, Piera." My name on his lips made something cold slither down my spine. I sat, but didn't lean back. "You said this works better. Want to explain what that means?" He regarded me like a historian might regard a relic rediscovered after decades. "Do you know who your father was?" The question threw me off. "He died when I was a baby. That's all my mother ever said." Bonifacio's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course she said that. It was safer that way. Safer for her. Safer for you." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a photograph, grainy, black and white, folded in the corners. "This is Riccardo Milanesi, your father, and once my closest friend." I stared at the photo. The man in it was laughing, arms slung around a younger Bonifacio. He had the same dark hair I did, the same storm cloud eyes. It was like looking at the outline of myself written in an older, sharper font. "We built this empire together," Bonifacio continued, his voice low, deliberate. "He was my consigliere, my brother in everything but blood. Until he betrayed me. I didn't breathe. He disappeared with sensitive information, handed it to my enemies, and nearly got my entire family killed. I should have hunted him to the ends of the earth. But he vanished with your mother." I shook my head. "You're lying." But even as I said it, the puzzle pieces I never questioned started clicking into place. My mother's sudden move to London. Her fear of cameras. Her refusal to talk about Italy. All of it made sense now, and none of it made me feel safer. She changed her name, Bonifacio went on. "Burned every bridge. Kept you hidden like a secret. But blood has a way of surfacing. Especially when it's old and unfinished." He leaned forward, his voice softening in a way that chilled me more than anger would have. "You're not here by accident, Piera. You're the loose end I never got to tie up." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "So what happens now? You keep me locked in a gilded room because of something that happened before I could walk." Bonifacio studied me for a long moment. "I haven't decided yet," he said, as if he were contemplating moving a chess piece. "But fate delivered you. And I never ignore a debt repaid in flesh." "I'm not part of your world," I said, rising from the chair. "I didn't choose this." He didn't stop me. "No," he said calmly. "But your father did. And that makes your blood part of mine, whether you like it or not." They returned me to the suite, and this time I didn't touch the food. I stood at the window long after sunset, watching the reflection of myself in the glass, same dress, same face, but nothing felt the same anymore. My father was a traitor to a Mafia family. My mother a fugitive. And me? I was the daughter of secrets no one warned me I was born to keep. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just let the knowledge sink in like ink spilled across a white sheet. This wasn't just captivity. It was inheritance. I couldn't let it define me. I wouldn't. Whatever game Bonifacio was playing, I'd learn it. Learn the board. Learn the pieces. Then flip the whole damn thing. But first, I needed answers. Not the ones he wanted to feed me, but the ones only my mother could give. And if that meant staying in this prison a little longer, playing the part of the well-behaved guest, so be it. I'd sip the wine, wear the dresses, smile when I had to. But one day, I'd walk out of here on my own terms, with my past in one hand and my future clenched like a blade in the other. The next morning, I woke to the sound of heels on marble, sharp, measured, unforgiving. Maria stood at the foot of the bed holding a pale blue dress on a padded hanger and a pair of cream stilettos. "You're to dress and be ready in 20 minutes, she said, as if announcing a royal procession. "Don Bonifacio will introduce you to the family today." I didn't ask why. I knew better now than to think I'd be given real answers. I took my time showering, memorizing every detail of the suite again: light switch positions, floorboard creaks, the location of every camera dotting the corners of the ceiling. The dress fit perfectly, of course. It had been tailored before I'd even known I'd be wearing it. The shoes were narrow, Italian, designed to remind a woman how to walk like she belonged in a room before she spoke in it. I stared at my reflection, trying to see someone who looked less like a hostage and more like a Milanesi, whatever that meant now. When the guards came, they didn't bother with small talk. They flanked me like sentries, escorting me down a new corridor, this one lined with family portraits, heavy gilt frames, and eyes that followed you even after you'd passed. At the end was a wide double door, open to reveal a room already buzzing with low conversation and tension so sharp it could slice through glass. Bonifacio stood at the center in a charcoal suit, hands clasped behind his back, gaze sweeping the room like a general surveying his soldiers. When he saw me, he nodded once. The room went quiet. "Gentlemen," Bonifacio said, voice calm but edged in command. "Let me introduce you to Piera Milanesi, daughter of Riccardo. Blood of Milanesi. Heir of legacy." I felt every eye snap to me, some curious, some skeptical, and some openly hostile. It was the last one, hostility, that told me exactly how powerful I was about to become. Bonifacio motioned for me to stand beside him. "My brother's betrayal nearly cost me everything," he said evenly, like reciting scripture. "But blood is blood. And the return of Milanesi flesh to this house is not an accident. It's a reckoning." I stood still, jaw tight, arms relaxed, like I didn't care about any of it, but I noticed everything. The man in the back with a tick in his jaw who couldn't meet my eyes. The woman to his left who pressed two fingers together at the mention of my name, sign of loyalty, maybe. The younger man near the door in a slim gray suit who didn't blink at all, just studied me like he was cataloging a threat. I cataloged him right back. After the speech, Bonifacio began introducing people by name: lieutenants, cousins, accountants, fixers. "This is Adriano," he said at last, nodding toward the gray-suited man I'd already noticed. "My nephew. Raised beside my own children. Loyal and brilliant." Adriano smiled without showing teeth. "Welcome, cousin," he said. "How generous of fate to return you to us." The tone was cordial. The implication was anything but. I returned the smile, colder. Fate has a twisted sense of humor. We spoke only for a minute, but it was enough. Adriano asked questions designed to seem polite, where I'd grown up, what I studied, if I'd ever visited Italy before. But I saw the calculations in his eyes, the way he tilted his head just slightly when I answered, as if weighing my worth against some internal scale. He didn't see me as family. He saw me as a threat to something he'd already considered his. Afterward, Bonifacio gave me the full tour of the estate, not the halls I'd already seen, but the rooms I hadn't. The war room with the giant map table. The gallery of black and white photographs, weddings, funerals, deals struck and sealed with champagne. The garden courtyard with the marble fountain where Riccardo Milanesi's image had been chiseled out of a once shared stone plaque. Erased history, now rewritten by my presence. "You carry his face," Bonifacio said as we passed one mirror. "But your eyes are harder than his." He was all charm. You calculate." I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a threat, so I said nothing. That afternoon, a lunch was arranged on the East Terrace, a dozen of Bonifacio's most trusted allies. I was seated beside the Don himself, a clear signal of protection and ownership. I played my part, smiled when appropriate, listened more than I spoke, accepted the wine but never more than 2 sips. They were testing me, probing for cracks, for signs of weakness or opportunity. I gave them nothing. And yet, even as I smiled, I watched. Watched how one man flinched when Bonifacio spoke his name. Noticed how another waited until Bonifacio looked away to speak at all. One woman, elegant, hawk-eyed, barely ate, watching everyone else's plates as if waiting for poison. I didn't know their names yet, but I would. The game had begun. I wasn't invited to play, I was placed on the board. But I'd played games before, just never ones where the stakes were this bloody. Or this personal. After lunch, Bonifacio called me into his private library, a cavernous room filled with books older than my birth certificate. He sat in a high-backed chair near the fire, the kind of man who looked more at home among antique weapons and leather-bound volumes than in the real world. You did well today, he said. But watching isn't enough. You need context. History. He reached into the desk drawer and slid a thick, leather-covered book across the table toward me. The spine read, Riccardo Milanesi, A Life in the Shadows. It looked like a rare biography, printed in limited edition. But when I opened it, I saw notes scrawled in the margins, dates corrected, motives questioned, entire paragraphs crossed out in red ink. I wrote those, Bonifacio said, watching me. Annotations. Truths behind the lies. My memories, what he wanted the world to believe, and what he really was. I stared down at the pages, my hands trembling slightly. Learn him, he said. Then decide who you are. If you discovered your family history was built on betrayal, would you seek the truth or bury it deeper? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you're following Piera's journey, subscribe to stay one step ahead in the game. The next few days unfolded like a silent war. No bullets, no threats, just watchfulness. Bonifacio didn't lock me away again, not visibly, but I was never alone. At least 2 guards trailed me everywhere I went, always just close enough to block a doorway. They wore suits instead of uniforms, spoke rarely, and didn't respond when I joked or asked their names. It wasn't surveillance, it was containment. Still, I learned more with every corridor I walked. The estate was sprawling, built like a fortress pretending to be a home. Marble floors, muffled footsteps, and oil paintings stared from every hallway, silent witnesses to generations of power. There were 5 exits on the main floor, only 2 that weren't guarded at all times, and even those had motion sensors cleverly tucked beneath sconces. I mapped them in my mind like a cartographer of captivity. The West Wing had a garden that looked ornamental, but I noticed the path curved inward instead of out, a trap disguised as a maze. The kitchen staff rarely spoke to anyone outside their own, but they watched me, lips pursed like I was a rumor that had walked into the room. Even the maids glanced down when I passed, some with pity, others with veiled judgment. To them, I wasn't a guest. I was the Don's mistake, or his warning. In the dining hall, they had begun calling me La Fantasma, the ghost. Whispers followed me like perfume. She looks like him. She's nothing like him. She won't last a month. Some said I was Bonifacio's redemption. Others said I was his second betrayal. But the thing about ghosts? They haunt. And I intended to. In the late hours, I returned to the annotated biography Bonifacio had given me. I read every page as if it might contain a map, something buried between the lines, and the ink, in the spaces where his handwriting bled over printed truth. Riccardo Milanesi was painted as a man of charm and intelligence, an architect of silence and strategy. But the margins told a different story, impulses, ambitions, and one secret scrawled in red beside a chapter titled The Schism. 3 words, he loved her first. I reread it a dozen times. He loved her first. It didn't say who her was, but I didn't need it spelled out. Bonifacio's wife. The woman he lost. My father hadn't betrayed Bonifacio over money, weapons, or territory. He'd betrayed him over love. The revelation cracked something open in me, not just about Riccardo, but about myself. My whole life, my mother had treated his name like a curse, a shadow we had to run from. I'd believed he was a criminal, a traitor, a ghost worth forgetting. But this wasn't about business. This was about blood and longing and a wound so deep it had outlived the woman who caused it. Suddenly, everything made sense. Bonifacio hadn't taken me by mistake. He'd known who I was. My face wasn't just familiar, it was inherited. I was Riccardo's legacy. And maybe, just maybe, I looked a little too much like the woman they both loved. The next morning, I asked to visit the Eastern Library, pretending to care about art history. It was a quiet wing, rarely used, and I knew from watching staff schedules that the guards rotated slower there. They obliged, but one still stood outside, leaning near the threshold, pretending not to listen. Inside, the books were old, dusty volumes of genealogy, war records, and family archives bound in cracked leather. I pulled a book at random and sat at the window, flipping pages but watching reflections in the glass. From the corner of my eye, I saw a new figure approach. A woman, tall, late 30s, sharp eyes and a darker red lipstick than anyone else dared wear in this house. She didn't ask if she could sit, she just did. So, she said, crossing her legs. You're the ghost everyone's whispering about. I looked up, meeting her stare without flinching. Depends who you ask. Some think I'm a reckoning. She smiled like someone who'd played this game longer than me. I'm Viviana, Bonifacio's fixer. And once, Ricardo's friend. That made me pause. He had friends. Fewer than he thought, she said. But more than Bonifacio liked. She leaned in slightly. Let me guess, you figured out it wasn't about money. He loved her, I said softly. Bonifacio's wife. Viviana gave a slow nod. Everyone knew. No one said it. She studied me again. You've got her chin. And his eyes. You're like walking into a memory Bonifacio's spent decades trying to erase. I closed the book. Is that why he brought me here? To punish a ghost? Viviana shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe to keep you. We don't always destroy what we hate. Sometimes we keep it close. Cage it. Control it. Her words echoed in my mind long after she left. I spent the rest of the day walking the estate again, this time not looking for exits, but for ghosts. I began to see them everywhere. In the locked room near the chapel with the floral wallpaper no one ever touched. In the photograph in the hallway, where Bonifacio stood beside a woman whose face had been scratched out. In the way he said my father's name, not with rage, but with something heavier. Regret. I returned to the study that night, demanding to see Bonifacio. Maria tried to stop me, but he let me in. He stood at the window, holding a tumbler of scotch, his reflection fractured by the glass. You've been busy, he said without turning. Learning. I stepped forward. Why did you really take me? He didn't speak for a moment. Then, without looking at me, he said, because ghosts deserve graves. I stiffened. And you think I'm his? No, he said, finally turning. You're hers. That hit harder than I expected. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. You loved her. It wasn't a question. More than anything, he said quietly. And she chose him. We stood in silence, the weight of history pressing like a hand on my chest. Then why keep me? I asked. Why parade me like a trophy? He studied me for a long time. Because every time they look at you, they remember. And every time you speak, you rewrite what Milanesi means. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to laugh. But mostly, I wanted to run. Later that night, I returned to my suite and stood before the mirror. I traced the line of my jaw, the curve of my cheek, trying to see her in me. The woman who shattered 2 kings with a single choice. And then I realized I wasn't a mistake. Bonifacio hadn't taken me to hurt me. He'd taken me because I was fire. Ricardo's blood. Her ghost. And in a world ruled by legacy and loyalty, I was both weapon and wound. The first time Bonifacio invited me into a strategy meeting, I thought it was a trap. I dressed in silence, chose a navy blouse over one of the floral dresses Maria laid out, and tied my hair back like armor. When I entered the room, every man at the table looked at me like I didn't belong, some with amusement, others with thinly veiled resentment. Bonifacio, seated at the head with a stack of reports in front of him, simply nodded to the chair beside him. Sit. Watch. Speak only if you have something worth saying. I did not speak for the first hour. I listened to words I barely understood, territories, alliances, shipments, routes. It sounded like war disguised as commerce. I watched Bonifacio's fingers drum against the table whenever someone lied. I learned that silence wasn't absence, it was calculation. After that meeting, he walked with me through the corridor instead of sending me back with guards. You watch them, he said. Good. A leader listens more than she speaks. I didn't ask what he meant by leader. I'd learned better than to chase his breadcrumbs without understanding the full path. Over the next 2 weeks, it became routine. 1 or 2 meetings a day, always in different rooms, sometimes a formal boardroom, sometimes the garden, once even in the wine cellar while he dictated instructions to a man counting inventory. Slowly, I began to speak. Not often. But when I did, Bonifacio listened. Once, during a discussion about a shipping lane dispute, I asked why they hadn't just rerouted through Corsica. Everyone went quiet. Bonifacio looked at me, tilted his head slightly, and smiled. "Why haven't we?" he asked the others. When no one had an answer, he made a call, changed the route, and ended the meeting early. He didn't praise me. He didn't need to. The approval was in the silence that followed, in the way no one dared to challenge me again in that room. It was power not given, but recognized. And I understood the danger of it immediately. We began speaking late at night. Sometimes over dinner in his study, sometimes over drinks by the window that overlooked the eastern gardens. At first, I thought he was testing me, waiting for me to slip, to say the wrong thing, to betray myself. But after the third conversation, I realized something else. He was lonely. He told me stories no one else heard, the wars that weren't fought with guns, but with bribes and betrayals. How he'd once lost 5 men because he trusted the wrong smile. How he built the Panicucci Empire not through fear, but through precision. How every ally was just a future rival waiting for the right motive. And how none of it mattered if there was no one to inherit it with strength. "You think legacy is blood," I said one night, swirling wine in a crystal glass. "But you only care because yours is dying." He didn't argue. He just watched me. "And yet, here you are," he said quietly, carrying both my curse and my answer. There were moments I forgot he was the man who had me taken from a wedding. There were moments I forgot I was still, technically, a prisoner. He didn't keep me in the suite anymore. I moved freely within the estate, under watch but not under lock. I had keys to rooms, to offices, to people. But freedom was a shifting thing. I could walk the grounds, but not leave them. I could read his ledgers, but not send a letter. I could sit at his table, but not call my mother. The cage had changed shape. It hadn't vanished. Still, I took what power I could. I learned how to read the body language of Bonifacio's captains, who crossed their arms when they were lying, who tapped their pens when they were nervous. I noticed who greeted me with clenched jaws, and who called me Signorina Milanesi with just enough warmth to be useful. I asked Maria about logistics, about supplier names, about who cleaned the surveillance system. I listened, always. Bonifacio noticed. One night, he handed me a folder and said, "Tell me which of these is a liability." I scanned it for 5 minutes, then circled 2 names. He didn't ask why. He just nodded and set the file aside. They were gone by the end of the week. Sometimes, he would drift into silence, staring at the fireplace like the flames held answers. That was when I saw the cracks, brief flashes of the man underneath the marble exterior. He never mentioned her, not by name, but I knew when he was thinking of the woman my father had loved. The woman they both lost. And I began to wonder if guilt, not grief, had carved the hollow into his chest. One evening, I asked him, "Do you regret it?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "Not taking her." I stared at him, breath caught. Letting her leave. We sat in silence after that, the kind that didn't need words to be loud. I should have hated him. I did once. But power makes strange bedfellows. And I was beginning to see that monsters weren't born, they were built. He let me see more than most. And I let him speak more than he should. We were building something dangerous, unspoken, unstable. A bridge between captor and captive, paved with observation, respect, and shared ruin. I wasn't falling for him, not in any way that made sense. But I understood him. And I knew he understood me too. In the days that followed, I found myself wondering, if I had been born into this world from the start, would I have become like him? Would power, once tasted, ever be enough? Or would it consume me the way it consumed him, one decision at a time? I didn't know yet. But I was starting to understand why people chose fire, even if it burned everything else. He brought me into more meetings, harder ones. Situations where alliances were tested, and every word was a gamble. I spoke with confidence I hadn't earned, and people listened. Not because of my name, but because they'd learned I remembered everything. Then, one night, after a particularly tense debrief in the library, Bonifacio looked at me for a long time. He didn't blink. Didn't speak, just stared, as if weighing the soul beneath the skin. Finally, he said, "You're the smartest Milanesi I've ever met. What would you do if the person who once held you captive started handing you power instead?" Let us know in the comments, and if you're drawn to the fire like Piera, subscribe to follow her next move in the world of legacy, lies, and quiet wars. The day began like the others, with precision, with silence, with purpose. I took breakfast in the glass sunroom, nodding at the usual faces, pretending not to notice that the guard assigned to me had changed. He was younger, stockier, too polished. His eyes didn't move like someone who was trained to scan threats. I asked Maria, offhand, where Raphael was. Reassigned, she said, but her voice skipped a beat, like someone had moved a piece without warning the board. I didn't like it. Raphael had been quiet, but consistent, the kind of man who kept one hand near his jacket and one eye on the corners of a room. A few days earlier, I'd casually mentioned the northern hallway was exposed near dusk. Too many shadows, too little movement. He'd made a note of it, then asked if I wanted his rotation shifted to cover it. I'd said yes, and that's why he'd been there last night, instead of at his usual post by the kitchens. Which is exactly why I was alive. It happened around midnight, after the meetings, after the chess game Bonifacio had silently invited me to lose, after the conversation with Viviana about shipments that didn't appear in the ledgers. I returned to my suite as usual, changed into sleepwear, and turned out the lights. But I didn't sleep. I'd grown used to the house's noises, footsteps, creaking floorboards, distant voices, and something tonight was off. The footsteps were too soft, too careful. I slipped from bed, barefoot, and stood in the dark. Someone was in the hall. The handle on my door moved slowly, silently. Whoever was there wasn't trying to check on me. They were trying to make sure I didn't make it to morning. The door creaked open, and I froze behind the armoire. The moonlight caught a glint of steel, long, narrow, unmistakable. A stiletto blade. The man stepped inside, tall, lean, face obscured by a balaclava. Professional. Quick. But so was Raphael. He struck from the side, a single shot fired into the floor, a warning. The attacker turned, lunged, but Raphael was faster. They struggled only seconds before the masked man dropped. Not dead, but very, very broken. Raphael secured him, bound his wrists, and called for backup. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart thundering, unable to speak. When Bonifacio arrived, he took one look at the man on the floor and said only one word, Adriano. He didn't mean the attacker. He meant who sent him. I should have been terrified. Shaken. Instead, I felt calm, steady. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was proof. 2 hours later, the entire estate was in lockdown. Viviana joined us in the main study, face unreadable, as Raphael gave his full report. The knife had a family seal engraved, he said. Subtle, but unmistakable. Bonifacio didn't argue. He poured himself a drink and stared into the fire like it owed him something. When Adriano was summoned, he didn't act surprised. He entered the room in a tailored suit, unhurried, and met Bonifacio's eyes without a flicker of fear. Uncle, he said. I assume this is about your ghost? I didn't flinch at the word. Let him think I was just a whisper. Ghosts linger longer than men. You sent a blade after blood, Bonifacio said. You tried to assassinate my heir in my house. Adriano's smile was dry. You mean your souvenir? Your replacement for everything you couldn't fix with time. His eyes flicked to me. She is not one of us. Bonifacio stepped forward slowly. No, but she's loyal, and right now, that's worth more than blood. The room froze around the sentence. Even Viviana looked up, as if the words had cracked something sacred. Adriano laughed, low and cruel. You'd throw me away for her? You threw yourself away the moment you acted without honor. Bonifacio's voice was quiet now. You don't get to wear this name and poison it. I thought he might order the execution then and there. I braced myself for the sound of a gunshot, the fall of a body. But instead, Bonifacio turned and poured a second glass of scotch. Strip him of all holdings. Remove his men from the eastern corridor. Cut his accounts. He will live barely. He handed the glass to Viviana like a toast. Let him remember what it means to be nothing. Adriano didn't fight. That scared me more than if he had. He looked at me once, cold and calculated, and said, You'll regret not killing me. I smiled. Probably. But not tonight. He was gone by sunrise. The guards doubled. My windows were reinforced. The estate went back to its polished rhythm, but the tension had shifted, like the moment right before a chessboard topples. And I stood exactly where Bonifacio wanted me. That afternoon, he called a private gathering, smaller than the usual strategy meetings, but more important. 10 men. 3 women. All captains. All power players. When I entered, they looked at me differently now, not with curiosity, but with calculation. I was no longer an anomaly. I was a contender. Bonifacio stood beside me, hand resting on the table. Adriano is no longer in command, he said. This house has been reminded that titles are earned, not inherited. And Milanesi blood, it seems, remembers how to survive. He turned to me, then back to the room. Piera will now oversee distribution and movement along the western corridor. She will report directly to me. No one spoke. But no one protested. That silence, that deadly, heavy silence, was power. After the meeting, Bonifacio and I remained alone. He sat with more weight than usual, like the years had finally remembered his bones. I didn't want to believe it, he said. That he'd become so hollow. I didn't answer. I was too busy thinking about how easy it had been to step into his place. I see the way you look at them, Bonifacio added. You're not afraid anymore. I met his gaze. I stopped pretending to be. He smiled faintly, like something bittersweet. Good. Because pretending was never going to save you. I returned to my room, locked the door, and stared at my reflection. No more fear. No more guessing. I wasn't acting anymore. I wanted the power. Not because of Ricardo or Bonifacio or the ghosts between them. I wanted it for me. The invitation arrived on thick paper, embossed with the old seal, 3 serpents coiled around a sword, the symbol of the Valenti Syndicate. A summit, they called it. A gathering of the 5 old families, Valenti, Orsini, Bellanti, Taddeo, and Panicucci. Not since the death of Bonifacio's wife had they all been in the same room. And now, decades later, they'd meet not to mourn, but to bear witness. Bonifacio handed me the envelope himself. They'll expect weakness, he said. You'll give them steel. I said nothing as I read it, the location set for a neutral villa 2 hours south, the kind of estate that whispered history from every wall. Do I speak? I asked finally. You stand. Let them look into the eyes of what's coming. The car ride was quiet, except for the occasional update from Viviana over the radio. Bonifacio wore black, always black, his cufflinks polished, his voice even. I, too, dressed deliberately, dark emerald silk, structured shoulders, nothing soft. Not a girl. Not a victim. Not a mistake. When we arrived, the guards at the gate didn't ask for names. They simply opened the doors and bowed their heads. Inside, the villa smelled of old wood, cigars, and expectation. The other families were already seated in the central chamber, an octagonal room with a domed ceiling and stained glass windows that painted everything in fractured light. I recognized most of the faces from dossiers Viviana had given me. Domenico Valenti, with his hawk nose and gold watch. Sofia Orsini, young but brutal, a queen without needing a king. Matteo Bellanti, who once burned down a village to prove a point. And Aldo Taddeo, the quiet one, the one everyone underestimated. Their eyes followed me as Bonifacio and I entered side by side. He didn't sit. This isn't a negotiation, Bonifacio said, voice low but resonant. This is a declaration. The room stilled. I could feel the weight of centuries settle into the silence. The Panicucci legacy will not die with me. My heir has been chosen. He turned toward me then, his hand outstretched. I stepped forward without hesitation. My heels echoed against the stone floor. I met every stare head-on. Some narrowed. Some widened. None looked away. This is Piera Milanesi, Bonifacio said, the name like a blade unsheathed. Daughter of Ricardo. Granddaughter of blood and fire. She does not kneel. She will inherit everything. Gasps were muffled behind raised hands. No one moved. I nodded once. I am not here to ask permission. My voice didn't shake. I'm here to confirm what you already fear. Bonifacio smiled, just slightly. And fear, he said, is a language we all understand. Valenti was the first to break the silence. You offer a ghost to sit among wolves. Orsini followed, eyes sharp. Blood is not loyalty. And women bleed for different reasons. I stepped closer to the center. You fear what I represent. Not because I'm unworthy, but because I wasn't raised in your chains. Valenti let out a laugh, low and rasping. She has Ricardo's mouth, he muttered. That's either salvation or suicide. Tadeo, the only one who hadn't spoken, simply inclined his head. It is done, he said softly, and done things have weight. Bonifacio nodded once more, then turned and walked away, leaving me at the center of the room, alone, held in the gaze of 4 people who could destroy me with a whisper. And yet I didn't move. I didn't blink. I let them look. I let them know. That night, back at the estate, the silence between Bonifacio and me stretched long and heavy. The fire was low, the scotch untouched. Finally, he rose and opened a drawer in the cabinet near the hearth. He held out a letter, old, folded, sealed with wax. He left it with me, Bonifacio said. Told me to give it to you if ever the day came when you stood where he never got to. I broke the seal with steady hands. The handwriting was familiar, it matched the annotations in the book Bonifacio had given me weeks before. If you're reading this, they made you choose. Power or peace. Don't pick both. You'll lose. I read the words 3 times, then a 4th. There was no greeting, no signature. Just those 4 sentences and everything they didn't say. I stared at the fire for a long time after that. Bonifacio sat beside me, not speaking. The flames cracked. The past breathed. And I wondered which part of me had already begun to choose. Later, I wandered the halls alone. The guards knew better than to stop me now. I moved through the estate like I had been born into its stone and shadow. Toward the west wing. Toward the gallery. The portrait hall was silent, paintings of Panacux's past, framed in gold and pride. Men with stern jaws. Women with narrowed eyes. A lineage carved in oil and history. And at the far end, a space where the wall was blank. I stopped in front of it, breath even, spine straight. I didn't need a brush or canvas to know what would come. I saw the future etched in fire and scars, in survival and steel. There will be a painting of me here, I whispered. And they'll remember exactly why. The night Bonifacio died began like any other, too quiet, too calculated, the kind of stillness that feels like someone holding their breath. He had summoned me to the eastern veranda for a late strategy review, a ritual that had become almost routine, though never casual. I noticed he was slower that evening, as if the weight of legacy sat heavier on him than the cut of his suit. But his eyes were sharp, alert, almost expectant, as if waiting for something only he knew was coming. When he dismissed the guards early, I should have known. We were walking back toward the main hall, him a step ahead of me, when the world exploded. Not with fire, no, ambushes in our world prefer silence. It was the sound of a single suppressed gunshot, the thud of a body, and the sickening pause before the truth hits. Bonifacio staggered forward, clutching his shoulder, and I barely had time to shout before shadows descended. Figures emerged from the dark, 4 of them, precise, quick, efficient. But they weren't precise enough. Raphael tackled one to the ground. Viviana materialized from nowhere, firing 2 shots that sent another man sprawling. The remaining 2 aimed at Bonifacio, but the Don raised a hand. Leave them, he rasped. And for reasons I didn't understand then, but would soon, everyone obeyed. The attackers fled into the night, leaving only blood and the echo of betrayal. Raphael pressed a cloth to Bonifacio's wound, cursing under his breath. It was Adriano, Viviana growled. This wasn't random. I didn't need confirmation. I felt it in my bones. This was the 2nd attempt, only this time, Adriano had been patient enough to choose the shadows Bonifacio expected. They carried him to his private chamber, one of the few rooms I'd never been allowed to enter before. Heavy wooden panels lined the walls, thick curtains blocking the moonlight, and a portrait of his wife hung above the fireplace like a haunting reminder of everything he'd lost. Blood soaked through his shirt, and his breathing came shallow and uneven. Get out, he murmured, waving off every person except me. Everyone but Piera. Viviana hesitated, but he lifted his head enough to glare at her. She left. The guards left. Raphael closed the door quietly, leaving me alone with the man who had stolen me, shaped me, and damn him, forced me to become something sharper, harder, necessary. Don't look like that, he said, coughing once. I've been dying for years. I sank to my knees beside him, gripping the edge of the bed. This wasn't supposed to happen. But it was, he whispered. Just not tonight. He motioned for the drawer by the bedside. I opened it and found a thick envelope sealed with wax, and beneath it, a key made of old brass. The envelope was labeled with my name in handwriting I recognized from his annotations: rough, angular, deliberate. Everything you need is in there, he said. Titles. Accounts. Proof of Adriano's alliances with the Valentis. And your claim to the throne. My breath caught, but he wasn't done. You're not like Ricardo, he murmured, eyes dimming. He took love and made war. You take war and make strategy. His hand trembled as he reached for mine, gripping tightly. They won't accept you. Not at first. Maybe not ever. But you will take what is yours. His breathing stuttered. I leaned closer. Piera, he rasped, don't let them bury you. Burn them first. Those were the last words he spoke. When his hand went limp, I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because tears felt like a luxury the wolves outside would devour. I closed his eyes, placed the envelope in my jacket, and stood with a spine that felt carved from steel. The dawn was dead. By dawn, the estate was in controlled chaos. Messages were sent. Guards redrew patrol routes. Every captain demanded answers, and every rival family waited for weakness. Viviana found me in the corridor outside the war room. You have to move fast, she said. Adriano's already claiming you orchestrated this. That you wanted the dawn out of the way. Of course he was. I walked into the war room without waiting to be announced. 15 people fell silent as I entered, their eyes taking in my posture, my expression, the envelope in my hand. I threw it onto the table, where it landed with a heavy thud. Bonifacio named me his successor, I said. And he left proof that Adriano has been selling information to the Valenti family for months. Gasps. Rage. The shuffle of chairs. I opened the envelope and spread the documents across the table, transcripts of calls, photographs, forged signatures, everything a traitor needed to be hung with. It didn't take them long. Within half an hour, Adriano was dragged into the room, wrists bound, eyes wild with panic and humiliation. This is a lie, he spat. You forged this. You've always wanted power. I stepped closer, close enough that he could see exactly how wrong he was. You're right, I whispered. I want power. But I didn't need to forge anything to take it from you. Viviana pressed a hand to his shoulder, forcing him to kneel. Bonifacio's captain stood behind me, not fully allied yet, but aligned by necessity. Power is a current. And right then, it flowed through me. Adriano Panicucci, I said, you betrayed this family. And I sentence you to live with the shame of your failure. He looked up sharply. You won't kill me? No, I said. That would be merciful. He was dragged away, screaming threats that sounded more like prayers. When the room emptied, Viviana remained by the table, arms crossed. He chose you, she said quietly. Don't make the same mistakes he did. I won't, I answered. I know exactly what I'm becoming. That night, after every debt had been called in and every loyalist positioned, I returned to Bonifacio's study. It felt colder without him. The room that once held his presence now held only memory. I placed the key he'd given me into the drawer of his desk and found the hidden compartment beneath. Inside were letters. His handwriting. His regrets. His sins. But also the blueprint for an empire. I closed the drawer, took a breath, and looked around one last time. The books. The weapons. The ghosts. Then I struck a match. The flame caught quickly, paper, silk curtains, the edge of the rug that had been stained with far too many secrets. Fire climbed the walls like it had been waiting for this moment, devouring the legacy of a man who never got to finish rewriting his story. I stepped back, watching the room turn to gold and ash. Let the old empire burn, I whispered. I'll build my own. If you were handed total power in the ashes of someone else's war, would you rise with it or run from it? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to witness how Piera rebuilds an empire from fire and betrayal, subscribe to follow the story The Fire-Gutted Bonifacio's Study by Morning, leaving only blackened beams and ash where legacy used to sleep. No one questioned it. Viviana made sure of that. The story that spread was simple. The Don had ordered it himself before his death, a symbolic act of passing the torch. What they didn't know is that I lit the match. And I hadn't done it for symbolism, I did it because no empire is built clean. In the weeks that followed, I became what the family needed me to be. I replaced scorched portraits with surveillance screens. I held meetings under chandeliers still stained with war, surrounded by men who used to doubt me and now feared disappointing me. I made them sit. I made them listen. I made them understand that I was not a shadow wearing a crown, I was the storm they hadn't seen coming. I balanced old-world fear with modern precision. I reinstated the couriers, but digitized the ledgers. I froze accounts of anyone who hesitated too long after my orders and redistributed power to captains who had stood behind me during Adriano's fall. I made it known that anyone speaking my name with doubt would find their alliances revoked, quietly, cleanly, with no one left to mourn them. And when I wasn't in meetings, I was studying trade routes, crypto laundering, government loopholes. Those who'd underestimated me were the first to kneel. Some did it publicly, hoping to win favor. Others sent apologies wrapped in donations and silence. I accepted neither. I wasn't interested in forgiveness. I was building a dynasty, not a democracy. But power, especially this kind, never comes without erosion. The estate had become mine, yet I no longer walked it freely. Every window had eyes. Every hall echoed with names I didn't trust. The guards saluted, but their faces held no warmth. And Maria, once a quiet comfort, now only called me Donna Piera. I had won the war, but lost something quieter. There were no dinners, no real sleep, no one who asked if I was tired or hungry or scared. Power has gravity, and I had risen so high that no one dared reach for me anymore. I was the name whispered in foreign clubs and enemy meetings, the ghost-turned-queen. But I was also alone. It was Viviana who finally reminded me of my mother. We were reviewing regional threats when she slid a paper across the desk, nonverbal as always. A single line, typed and stamped, Piera Milanesi, Stage 4 Diagnosis, Milan. I stared at the name for a long time, like it belonged to someone else. Did she know where I was? I asked. Viviana shook her head. She never searched. But she never changed her number. I closed the file without a word. That night, I packed a bag, told Raphael I'd return in 72 hours, and left the estate for the first time since Bonifacio's death. The drive to Milan felt longer than it should have. The roads were familiar but foreign, like a song I'd heard in a dream. I had no disguise, no weapon, no guards, just a trench coat and my real name. I wasn't Donna here. I was daughter. And that made the air feel thinner. She lived in a modest flat above a bakery, 3 flights of stairs that smelled like flour and loneliness. When she opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, paler, but still sharp around the eyes. She didn't speak for a long time. Neither did I. She just stepped aside and I walked in. The apartment was clean but bare. Books on the shelf. A kettle whistling too long on the stove. "You're alive," she finally said. And wearing his face. I flinched. "I wear my own face now." "Do you?" she said, not unkindly. We sat at the kitchen table like strangers at a train station, sharing space, but nothing else. "You knew who he was," I said. "You knew what he was." My mother nodded. "I knew everything. And that's why I ran." I leaned forward. "From Bonifacio?" She shook her head. "From your father." The silence cracked like glass. "He changed after her," she said. "After Bonifacio's wife." There was grief. Then obsession. He didn't just love her, he needed her. Her voice was soft, distant. And when he lost her, he decided he'd never lose anything again. Not control. Not loyalty. Not even me. I wanted to argue. To say she was wrong. But deep down, I remembered the way she flinched at loud sounds. How she never let doors lock behind her. How she always watched her reflection twice before we left the house. "He never hurt me," she said. But he made me disappear. I swallowed hard. And me? You were the one thing I took from him. The only thing he wanted more than her. I closed my eyes because it was too much. Because everything I'd built, everything I'd become, was tangled in the ruins of a man who had loved too violently to ever be loved back. I hated Bonifacio for years, she said. But he never tried to find me. Your father did. Her hand trembled as she reached for the teacup. And now you sit where they once stood. Tell me, Piera, do you know the difference yet? I opened my mouth. Then closed it again. We didn't talk about the illness. We didn't talk about death. We just sat there until the sun moved, casting light through the window like a spotlight neither of us wanted to stand in. When I finally rose to leave, she touched my wrist. You don't have to be either of them. I know, I said. But if I have to be something, I whispered, pausing at the door, I will not be my father. My voice didn't shake. But I will not be weak. The gates of the Panicucci estate opened for me alone. No entourage. No guards. No pretense of ceremony. Just me in the back of a black sedan, my fingers resting over the folded fabric of a dress I hadn't seen since the night this all began. The lavender gown had survived it all: ripped seams, smoke, silence. I'd had it cleaned, but not repaired. The tear on the left hem still whispered of a struggle. Of the girl I used to be. And tonight, I wore it not as a relic, but as a reminder. Maria met me at the top of the stone steps, eyes glossed with something too old to be grief. She said nothing, only offered a slow nod and stepped aside. Inside, the house had changed. The tapestries were gone. The portraits had been removed. And the hall I now walked belonged to no man. The family gathered at midnight in the great hall, no invitations, no excuses. They came because they knew. Because power, like blood, calls its own. Captains, soldiers, allies, and rivals stood pressed into the walls of the room where Bonifacio had once dictated law and punishment alike. But tonight, no dawn entered. Only a woman. I walked in alone, unarmed, unguarded, and I did not blink. My heels clicked against polished stone, echoing like a declaration. They watched the dress first, lavender, flowing, too soft for war. Then they watched my eyes. And they knew this wasn't pageantry. This was a reckoning. I stopped at the head of the room, beneath the chandelier that had survived 3 generations of secrets. I didn't stand behind a podium or on a raised step. I stood on equal ground and made them rise to meet me. Viviana was there, beside Raphael, and even they looked uncertain of what I would do next. I liked that. My name is Piera Milanesi, I said. But you already know that. The room was silent. I was not chosen by tradition. I was chosen by fire. And from fire, I do not flinch. Some straightened at that. Some bowed their heads. No one spoke. I will not rule by fear, I continued. But I will not be ruled by ghosts. There will be no more forced blood feuds. No more arranged daughters traded like bonds. No more children branded by sins they didn't commit. I let that hang in the air, sharp as a blade. This family will stand, I said. Not as a relic, but as a force. We will cut out rot, not plant it deeper. We will adapt. Or we will be replaced. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Then a single voice rang out soft, sure. We follow. It came from Tadeo's eldest, stepping forward with a nod that broke the silence like thunder. The old rules died with the old men, he said. Long live the woman who made them burn. More voices followed, like falling dominoes, captains, cousins, even quiet Maria. And when the final voice echoed, I knew the coronation was complete. Not of crowns. Of control. Later that night, when the hall emptied and the candles guttered low, I walked alone through the portrait gallery. The frames were empty now, their occupants taken down not out of disrespect, but out of irrelevance. They had written their chapters in blood and silence. I would write mine in fire and steel. I stopped at the far wall, the one that had remained blank for so long. The place reserved for heirs, for history. I stood there in silence, the fabric of my gown brushing the stone beneath my feet. And I smiled. They took the wrong bride, I whispered, but I became the right queen. Thank you for listening until the very end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the story. There's another story like the one you just enjoyed on your left screen.